we're doing the Diversity and Outreach in the Ethics Bowl session. And so, Rachel, why don't we go ahead and just introduce ourselves again for anybody who might be joining us?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rachel Robeson Greene. I'm an assistant professor at Utah State University. I've been working with the Ethics Bowl for about 20 years in different capacities. Right now I'm on the Rules Committee and, importantly for this session, the Diversity Committee. I was the original chair of the Diversity Committee, and actually the Diversity Committee was created as a result of some discussions at this workshop. Folks had a lot to say about diversity. We thought we'd better have a group. And there's some other members of the Diversity Committee, including the chair here. So Glenn, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much, but would you mind introducing yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great, what is it, Friday? That's odd, but I am for the summer. Yep, chair of the Diversity Committee. It's good to be here. I'm psyched to see all of you because we are interested in growing our pie. So talk more about that later. Cool.
And then who else do we have here from the Diversity Committee? Also Sandy, I think.
Yes. I'm here. I've moved from the lounging on the couch to the chair where the cat will probably attack things. So yeah, I was on the Diversity Committee for a while and I was chair for a minute and then took this new kind of administrative gig, and so backed off, and there goes the fan. Oh, okay. And yeah, so I'm here and I'm psyched to do this, and I thank Glenn for picking up the mantle. And yeah, that's it.
And Lisa as well, right? I'm hoping I remember you.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, great. Well, I think is that all of us that are here? Oh yeah, I know that Deborah's going to introduce Yolanda, so I'll save that.
So yes, I'll just go ahead and reintroduce myself again because I see we've got more folks who've joined us since earlier in the morning. So I'm Deborah Maurer and I'm at the University of Mississippi, and I'm also the chair of the IEB committee. IEB Ethics Bowl Committee. And so I'm delighted to have everyone here. And one of the things to mention that we've been working on through API is we've been developing an emphasis on outreach. So this session is on diversity and it's on outreach. And we're going to have what we hope is a really interesting conversation today. But very briefly, one of the things that we've been doing in API is thinking about the issue of outreach and trying to really expand our mission of getting the Ethics Bowl to more colleges and universities around the country and how we can bring in more students and more types of students. So obviously there's some really interesting overlaps with thinking about the concept of diversity as it pertains to outreach. And so to further that end, one of the things that API's done is we've gotten a Lumina sponsorship, and the money from the Lumina sponsorship was used to create an outreach coordinator position. And so I want to go ahead and introduce Yolanda AC. So Yolanda, I'm going to have you speak up here in a minute, but Yolanda is the new person in our position. And I will say that we issued a nationwide call for the person for this position. And we had a lot of fantastic people who applied. And Yolanda stood out amongst all of them as being an absolutely stupendous candidate. I'm very excited for what she's going to be bringing to this position. So Yolanda, if you could just take a few minutes and introduce yourself and then also say a little bit about what you've done so far already, I think folks would really like to hear about it.
Okay, good to meet everybody. Hello, my name is Yolanda AC. And I'm also from the great state of Mississippi. And my interest in Ethics Bowl really started in the high school level. I'm also a graduate from Mississippi College School of Law, so that kind of gave me a preview of somewhere that ethics is very necessary in our state and country. And from that, I wanted to grow. I wanted to get more involved in understanding ethics itself and how it can be applied to the practical general public. And so in my search, I found API, and I looked at their program, and then I saw this position. I said, that is exactly what I want to do, because in Mississippi I work as a high school English teacher, 11th grade, and I send people out into the world as graduates from high school, and I see that they need to have some type of ethical foundation as early as possible to build on for you all. One of the things I hear you all say is, how do we get more students involved? I think that's by bringing students, from high school or from, I've even found some in middle school that can bring, come to this with some experience and with some desire to get a little deeper into the ethical discussion. And so I hope to bring that enthusiasm. I'm a graduate from Central State University. I have my bachelor's from Central State. I have a master's from Jackson State. So I'm very familiar with the HBCU process. And I know that this is something that is needed. There needs to be a cross-generational, cross-cultural, cross-race discussion about what is ethical for America, period. I know every group has their own voice, but there needs to be a common song. Even though we all have our own song we sing, there should be a common one, and ethics is where that commonality should be. So I hope to bring more people to, to see it my way, that yes, we need to, you may not like what I think, but you can still love me, so I hope to bring that same idea. And, and that's kind of where my outreach has gone. I created a list of all the HBCUs. I plan to still, keep the list going, contact them, thank them for registering. I also wanted to reach some of the other different universities, the traditionally Hispanic and Native Americans, because like I said, we're America, so we need to have this idea that while we may be different, there are some commonalities. So that is what I've done so far, is try to reach out to them, and I want to continue to do that on the because like I said, I teach high school and on the high school graduate and undergraduate and secondary level. I think there should be ethics throughout.
So one other quick thing to mention about Yolanda, she's very, very very careful to not toot her horn too much. So I'll just do it for her, which is that she's already reached out to 5 or 6 schools, and they've already registered, I believe, for some regional competitions. So when she says that she's been really active, like she's really been active. One of the other things to mention that the Luminous sponsorship is doing is it's allowing us to develop some communication materials. And so this weekend, we're going to be working on developing, we've got a videographer coming in, and we're going to be working on developing some videos that we can use for outreach and promotion, specifically trying to get the word out to new groups of students, new colleges, new universities across demographical groups, and also in particular to really try to focus on HBCUs and bring in new batches of students that we formerly haven't had before. So pretty excited about some of these new materials that we're working on, and hopefully we'll be able to release them to you. I'm not sure the timeline, but hopefully pretty soon. So that's the background on all the folks involved in the diversity committee and in the outreach division for API. And so one of the things that in thinking about this session that we thought might be valuable is to have a broader conversation about some of the goals behind the work of these committees and what we're trying to do, and really think really broadly about what it is that we mean by the concept of diversity and what it is that we mean by the concept of outreach, and whether or not those are the same projects with the same goals, or if they are complementary goals. And because this will help us think about the kinds of materials to produce, the routes forward to take, particular folks to reach out to. So we think this could be a helpful conversation. And I see in the chat also that Glenn Summers, the chair of the diversity committee, is here. Glenn, could you wave or get Zoom to switch to you? Or well, you're gonna have to speak up, I think, to make
Here I
Zoom's
am. Greetings. Greetings. Yes, one of the things that we've been doing with the committee is just trying to figure out where we're going to go, what we're going to do. And one of the things that actually listening to Rachel, we want to broaden the committee a little bit, have a little bit more than the core few of us, try and get it as broad as possible so that we can represent the group as best as possible. And so by being able to be here and meet with you all today, I think that's something that we'll be able to hopefully accomplish.
Yes, good. Thank you, Glenn, and welcome everybody. So thinking about the work of diversity and thinking about the work of outreach, I'm hoping that Lisa can start us off.
Well, thanks. thanks for everybody for the interest in this topic for Ethics Bowl. And Yolanda, it's so nice to meet you. I've heard so many great things about you, and it's nice to see you. At any rate, one of the things that we have talked about, and Glenn and I in particular for some time, is thinking about how not just do we want diversity in teams, we also want to reflect in the judging pool and the moderator pool a similar diverse set of folks. And somebody had mentioned earlier, I think it was Helena, about maybe not, but that not all judges are philosophers, and so people have different perspectives. That is such a good thing for Ethics Bowl, as we all know. One really important thing for us is to make sure that students who might be interested in participating in Ethics Bowl can see themselves in the judge pool and or the moderator pool. So, that is a piece I think that's important for us to think about too. It's not just schools and just students, but the whole enterprise. In terms of your initial question, Deborah, about, is diversity different than outreach? And just at first blush, for me, I think about outreach as, as kind of a generic term, reaching out to people who might be interested in what we're doing. And I think of the, diversity in that respect as more of an intentional kind of seeking people who are and teams who are diverse on many different axes. Obviously the way we, our disciplinary backgrounds, our demographics, our age, race, sex, sexual orientation, gender, et cetera. But that to me has to be something a little bit more intentional, because I think when people look in, they see a certain thing and make assumptions. And what we want them to know through outreach is, we want diversity. We want to invite differences. And even if we look a certain way or seem a certain way, so to me, the diversity piece just seems much more intentional about really opening up a space where people with diverse perspectives want to be. And so how do we signal that through our outreach, I guess, is kind of how I think of it. So a little bit different. I wouldn't want to conflate the two as being the same thing, because I do think they're different. We need to reach out, but we also need to look inward and say, are we the kind of organization or activity that would be attractive to the kinds of diversity that we're interested in having in our activity.
Good. Thank you, Lisa. That's really nice. And I'm glad that you mentioned judges in particular, because I had forgotten to mention them from our list. So thank you for bringing that back in. John?
Well, the one thing I was just thinking about was that I think also Diversity Week work does not just include diversifying the pool of participants, right? But also, we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, also creating, and I think this in a lot of ways was sort of what motivated the creation of the diversity committee in the first place, is making sure that the Ethics Bowl space is a space that's welcoming. So for instance, in the virtual space, when we went virtual, trying to implement the habit of judges and moderators and organizers putting preferred pronouns in, as well as the team participants in, and thinking about all the different ways that little elements of how the bowl is organized can either fail to send the message of inclusivity or to send that well. So that's just a thought that I think sometimes when we think about diversity, it's about we think in terms of representation, but I also think some of it is about all the other things that we do to feed into that.
Yeah, so one such thing that the diversity committee has worked on over the years, and a much earlier iteration of the diversity committee, Sandy and I put together and this was controversial actually, so maybe we can talk about it, but put together like a sensitivity document about talking about LGBTQ issues. Because so it's not just about like who we have involved, but also the kinds of language people are using at tournaments and things like that. But that can be a tricky issue because you say, you know, you give, and it pertains to this larger issue of what kind of cases we should have and things, because you give this sensitivity document out, and then people think they're essentially being told how they have to argue a particular case, because if this is the language that we have to use, then this is the position you're sort of suggesting that we take. Although we didn't say you have to use this language, it was like, this is the respectful language to use, right? So sometimes these issues come up against one another, but I think that one thing we have to be able to deal with is students not just participating, but feeling comfortable. So getting them involved isn't enough, but also creating a space where they feel safe.
Good. I think that's a really nice point. Thinking about issues of not just diversity, but how diversity differs from inclusion. And how do we signal certain types of inclusion and welcoming environments? So really nice points. I'm taking notes, by the way. I keep looking down because I'm trying to be a scribe. Lisa.
Rachel, just to your point, one of this made me think about the situation a few years ago. We had a case that I think ended up making a person with, you know, in a non-binary gender identity very uncomfortable, and there were some issues related to that. And I do think that we talk about students, we talk about judges and moderators, et cetera, coaches even being diverse. We also need to think a little bit about case writing in this respect too. And I think the idea that if we're going to write a case about a particular, identity type of person, et cetera, that we need to make sure that people are, you know, who are affected by this kind of the issues we're talking about in the case are involved in writing that case, or at least have some opportunity to review it. Because I think that in some ways is what happened with the language problem. Like, here's preferred language, and it was partly because maybe people who wrote the case didn't know what the preferred language was or whatever. So all that to say is that, we're really talking about just making sure that every aspect of the Ethics Bowl honors and, diversity and is inclusive, because those are, as we've all said, different things. And importantly, as John mentioned, send the signal. So a well-written case that is sensitive to how people identify themselves or the words they use to describe themselves, it really sends us the right signal, a really different signal than, a case where we're talking about someone else.
I agree. Yeah.
Good. Very nice points, Lisa. Thanks. Mark.
Just, I want to point out something that I've heard that some of my colleagues have struggled with outside of the Ethics Bowl, but just in general, about, it seems to me that when you, it seems to me that when we try to frame a case or talk about respectful language or whatever, that it reminds me of something Michael Sandel argues, is that we're trying to come up with a process that's fair to everybody without talking about the content, right? We're trying to avoid conversations about, say, gender, and we're defaulting to inclusiveness when the whole moral point is for some people quite contested. Do you know what I mean? Like, so and if Ethics Bowl is supposed to be about contested issues that have, see, and here, so I don't agree with this, but I can imagine someone saying issues around gender identity is a contested issue. Well, I happen to think it's not, but there are many people who do think, and if we as an organization default, we're kind of telling people this is the right way to be. And yet we're an organization that's trying to encourage nuance and careful deliberation about issues. Do you know what I mean? I'm kind of like talking out loud, so please don't hold me accountable to the precision of what I'm saying. It strikes me that sometimes when we encourage our students or our colleagues to kind of adopt language, the language is already mortally loaded. Do you know what I mean? In both ways. I don't know. It's just, it's a problem for the discussion of diversity, equity, inclusion. Like it's really, 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 I think is really challenging and tricky to avoid closing down conversation, unless we want to make the claim that certain conversations are closed and that's the end of the story, whether people have come along with us or not, you know? So anyway, just my thoughts.
Good, thanks, Mark. That's really, there's a lot there because I think we could have a whole session on that. I think we'll probably come back to a lot of those points and issues, and I think we're going to get to some of those maybe tomorrow as well. So for now, let me put a pin in that and we'll move to Yolanda.
Well, I was kind of talking about the same thing that Mark was, but I guess I was kind of looking at the question of kind of where do we go from here? Because you don't want to be try to be so inclusive that you end up being exclusive, so you want to kind of strike that balance. But there needs to be, and just, coming from the high school area, moving into college, there needs to be that place where students have a place where they can tackle the hard issues, the tough questions that, are out there and that are mounting up in society. And I kind of, feel the Ethics Bowl is that place, is that, point where you can have those tough discussions. But I think it looks more to coaching, more as the coach helping them understand that when that hard question comes, what is your rebuttal? What do you say? What do you, how do you answer the question without, educating the person instead of taking offense to what they said, and kind of how, but I think that more falls on the coaches to, maybe find some old cases that ask the hard questions. They know they have, someone in their group who happens to be, African-American and gay. And, they have the whole dichotomy, go ahead and put it out there in the safe space of your team, so that you can tackle that. So when you get to the, somewhere else and that question comes up, that they kind of know how to approach it. So it seems to me that would be more in coaches training, how to help your students navigate those waters of the tough issues. And what do they do when they meet a judge who doesn't, agree with them, and let them know that these, these voices are out there. So you kind of have to know what to say to them. But it seems more that's a, an area for coaches to kind of get their grounding in.
I think it's also important though, too, because as I'm hearing this, I'm just thinking, well, there are certain segments of society, there have been different issues that have been controversial over time and then sort of been resolved as a community. And there are some that are, some people view as unresolved, but that seem like all the best arguments go in one particular direction. They seem headed in that direction, but there are still some people who are unwilling to accept that. So we have to treat those issues as if they are genuinely still open, even though that hurts people. And pretty significantly in some cases. And so I think that we have to okay, we can, if we want to say, we just got to prepare our students for this idea that there are going to be people who disagree with you on your very identity, and you just have to, here's how to deal with that. Then we also have to realize that those people are just unlikely to participate in the ethics. So if we're thinking about real inclusion, the idea of just telling someone, well, we're just going to debate your identity, then, well, we might have to kiss goodbye the inclusion aspect.
Sandy?
So Rachel and I were in on this early stuff because there was a transgender, I don't know if it was athletes, we had a bunch of those cases for a while, but I had a student who was trans, and they read the case as a question about whether they exist, right? Like, does a trans identity even exist? And so it isn't like preparing them to deal with maybe some ugliness or something like that. It was this fundamental question that really I didn't know how to answer. And surely the student didn't know how to answer. Besides me saying, well, some people just haven't quite figured it out. And, and that student did leave. And I was personally incredible, tried to be very supportive, but the perception from the student was that the structure of the way this was being presented was alienating. And I think that's maybe what Rachel's trying to get at. I'm not sure, and I think that's the kind of the question about, writing the cases and making sure that, I didn't read it that way, but I'm not trans. And so now I have a different lens, but there are, I think, angles and attributes of cases that those of us who are in, cisgender, white, aren't going to see. And so maybe it is something, but then I don't want to put the burden on the people who we are supposed to be helping to educate us all the time. That's also unfair. I mean, I've had people go, oh, I didn't know lesbians smiled. Right. Okay. I can't educate you on all the things. And so, and I'm not the, and if I didn't smile, that shouldn't confirm your bias. It's I don't know. So I don't want to put the burden on the people either. So I don't know. I'm not helping probably at all, except for to say there are probably things that are invisible to us that we need to make visible.
Sandy, you always help.
You're funny.
So John, and I'm looking at our time, and I want to make sure we also come back to questions about judges and moderator and diversifying those, and institutions and HBCUs in particular, which is our focus. Although I recognize that thinking about cases themselves also addresses how we engage with outreach and getting more diversity of judges and moderators, and reach out to institutions too. They're all interrelated. So John, short.
I'll try. I just think there's also sort of the opposite problem, and I don't know that we talk about the opposite problem as often, which is, we have the issue of someone is on the team with an identity that's in question in the case, but there's something a little bit uncomfortable, or something we should talk to students about having a bunch of students talking about a case that is addressing an identity that no one on the team shares in. And so, I mean, it's an uncomfortable truth that in some of our institutions, you are more likely to have a trans student on your team than a person of color. That is how white some of the institutions in the ethics pool are. And when you have a case talking about Trayvon Martin, or we had a case about the wearing of masks and racial profiling related to masks. So I think there's also, I don't have a solution or even really a question, but just want to put out that that's something that I think is important for us to think about and discuss about. I was watching a comic the other day that was a member of an underrepresented group sort of joking about how he gets very tired of people being offended on his behalf. And he's like, let me adjudicate what offends me. And so I think there is that element of it from an inclusivity point of view. Lisa, to your point, oh, we want people to know that we talk about these issues that, affect a whole range of people. And that's right, but it can also have the effect of looking patronizing if handled poorly. So I just think it's an issue to, keep in mind as an organization as we go forward.
Good. Really nice batch of issues, and somewhat short for you, John. So Glenn, I see you've got a really nice comment that we do need to explore our overall messaging, and I think that's exactly right. And maybe this could be an entire session. Just messaging could be an entire session for a future workshop, because I think there's just so much to address here. But I do want to turn us back to questions surrounding how to diversify our judge and moderator volunteers, and also how to reach out to institutions, because I think some of these questions about, the point that John just made, we're more likely to have someone who's trans on a team presenting to judges than we are to have someone who is African American, is true for a lot of the institutions. And so how could we try to increase the diversity of our judges and moderators? And also, how can we try to increase the diversity of the institutions themselves. I think we all recognize that having greater numbers of individuals across various identities will help to lead to a richer, more nuanced conversation. We bring more voices into the conversation. We bring more people to the table. And so what are some of the things that we can do to try to increase the diversity of judges, moderators, and institutions? And I know that Yolanda's listening with bated breath for ideas.
Yes.
Deborah, I think this is a huge part of our outreach, right? Is to really focus not just on outreach for teams, but outreach for judges and for moderators and the like. I mean, I'm thinking about approaching a school and, maybe they're like, well, yeah, this sounds cool, but I don't have time or money, or I can't figure this out. It might be that we invite people to come to be judges and experience what Ethics Bowl is all about, and train them up to be a judge, and then they can see how it works. I think that sounds great. And as I'm saying that, I'm hearing John say to me, yes, but at the last minute on Sunday morning, when we have, 4 judges not show up, then what do? We grab whoever is available. And I get that for sure. But I think if we had, a way to help people who are going to be judges be committed to some training and actually make the commitment. This isn't I'll do it if I'm available or if you need me, but it's really an activity that somebody is honored to do. I mean, every time I'm asked to be a judge, I am honored to be part of this amazing organization and this amazing activity. And I think if we can do some of that, that might help with people keeping their commitments and in our outreach and the stuff you're doing, Yolanda, to actually be keeping in mind that even if somebody's not ready to start a team, they might be willing and interested becoming a judge in Ethics Bowl.
Good. Thank you, Lisa. That's fantastic. And I see some related points. I want to get these great comments out of the comments box because not everybody has that box on, nor does everybody read it. So Glenn, could you just jump in, and then Sandy, I'll have you follow.
Yeah, I'm typing a bunch, but one of the things that I've written there is we can focus a little bit on our corporate partnerships, kind of leverage that to get some folks in who are going to bring a totally different perspective, but also their organizations are involved with us so that, there may be a natural connection there, if you will. Another thing that I put out there is we need to focus on our recent grads. They've participated in the bowls, and so they're already expressing an interest in us. And so kind of like just figuring out a way to maybe just send out emails and say, hey, we got this going on or whatever. But just trying to keep them as part of our organization with a focus on the long term, because hopefully they'll stay with us.
Good. So Glenn, that's a great point. I love the suggestion about reaching out to corporate organizations and asking them to contact their employees, and in particular, maybe employees who've gone through some DEI training, right? That would be a wonderful step forward. And just so that everyone knows, we already have a developing alumni network as part of the outreach committee. And so they are a very active group of alumni who have been developing all sorts of ways to maintain contact with other students. And so we're hoping that we can really build and capitalize on that network as we move through the years. So Glenn, you are brilliant in making your suggestions for ways that we can move this forward. And I hope that one of the things that we'll be able to see is as we build more diversity into the organization and the students and the teams and the judges and the moderators, that as we'll be able to keep those folks around continuing over time, we'll be able to increase the overall diversity throughout the years. So I think maintaining those connections is a really important piece of this. But Sandy, you had a great suggestion as well. Can you mention this to the group?
Sure. So actually, there are lots of different kinds of professional societies. And so I just happen to know about the African-American Professional Society of Lawyers in Denver. And they were thrilled to be asked. I actually don't know how many folks showed up, but they were really excited to be asked. And then there's also Hispanic attorneys, a professional society. So lots of professional societies, and also companies, when we hosted, there are ethics officers and they got credit, quote unquote, like as, I think it was Lockheed Martin. I can't remember, one of the big defense. So School of Mines is all about extraction and industry. But the person who came and did it had her picture taken with the team so she could get credit for doing this outside work. So we can also maybe leverage that in some way to say, not only is it good for the world, but it's good for you, depending on the company. And I bet you a lot of companies have some sort of, at least the bigger ones, have some sort of program like that.
Good. That's a really interesting model to suggest for trying to increase the diversity of moderators and judges in particular. Good.
I had I'm sorry to jump in. I need to raise my
Oh,
hand,
jump
but
in.
there I had looking at some sororities, fraternities, having them be judges and moderators, and also professional organizations. I had kind of spoken with I am the vice president for the Hattiesburg Association of Educators. So I had spoke with them about, some of those teachers doing that as well, and looking at pre-service teachers. Some of them come from William Carey University, looking at some of those kind of a way to simultaneously show them about ethics bowl as well as a pre-service teacher. Hey, when you get in your classroom, this is a good idea, to kind of do that as well. So that was kind of some of the avenues. And I think those were, like Sandy said, they were excited to be asked, about the event and something to do. So that was something that I thought about amping up. And I see here that might be a good avenue to look at those professional organizations, because they are looking for future members themselves. And so, that could kind of be a win-win for them to find some, ethical future people to join their organization, as well as see what this is about. So these are some ideas I'll really look at.
Good. Very nice. In terms of thinking about how we do outreach for folks who have not formally been involved in the Ethics Bowl to increase the diversity of that, I think it's a great suggestion. We have a little bit of time left. One of the things that I think trying to, as best we can, bring all these issues maybe full circle is in some of the ways that we might try to engage in outreach to bring in new people to the organization and the activity of the Ethics Bowl. What considerations do you all have for the best ways to reach out? So one of the things we've talked about is particular cases. And we've talked about the fact that cases may be off-putting to particular individuals or particular identities for various reasons. So in terms of suggestions for how we can increase the diversity of our judge and moderator pools and the diversity of the various institutions, what are some suggestions? Here we're engaging in active brainstorming because we would like suggestions and advice. How can we try to send the right messaging so that we do increase that diversity? Yes, we need to clone Yolanda like 40 times over.
Well, one thing that I know just from talking with Yolanda that oh, sorry, Alex. Sorry, go ahead.
You're already talking now. Go ahead.
All right. Well, just Yolanda and I were talking, and I know that she was talking about in introducing Ethics Bowl to new schools, bringing cases. So we keep talking about like cases as the problem when it's a problematic case, but it's also maybe the answer, which is like, oh, this is a really exciting case. It really gets at some interesting things that affects the lives of students on this campus. And, they become the best advertising for the bowl, right? Is to picking up cases that can be really intriguing. And that doesn't have to be, oh, look, it speaks to your identity, but it's just, this is something exciting that you would want to talk about. So that's just, I guess that's very simplistic, but I think, we should remember that the cases are the best selling point for the bowl, really.
Okay, good. And I love this suggestion. I do think cases pull people in. But the reason I'm sort of trying to bring this full circle is because I'm thinking about the worries that some of you raised at the beginning of our conversation about the fact that some cases can be off-putting in ways that we hadn't considered. And so I'm not certain that the cases are always going to sell in the way that we want. There might be certain criteria that the cases need to be vetted for example, to be used for outreach, in particular to bring in certain groups that we want to try to increase diversity for. Alex.
Yeah, so my suggestion will be accompanied by a shameless plug for the recruiting pipeline session that John and I are going to do tomorrow at noon. So hopefully we'll see you there. But my point is to say, start younger, and to do sort of more broadly concerted organization wide, rather than in a way that focuses on individual institutions recruiting students as they arrive on their campuses. Broader outreach to high school students who participate in the high school ethics bowl, who more and more look like the American school system rather than the contents of the average philosophy department in a school that already participates in that IEP, right? So that's all to say, you know, how do we catch students between the time that they leave high school and the time that they arrive on your campuses, right? Because often by the time they arrive on your campuses, they're already involved in everything they're going to be involved in, or, you know, they've already made their schedules for the semester, right? You get all of these kind of obstacles in their way. So, you know, finding ways to get to them earlier, which is what I hope to kind of help out to do with API. But yeah, I mean, you know, making, I guess, the direction of fit a little bit different, such that, you know, rather being in most cases internal to centers or departments or even individual institutions, recruiting is a little bit more institutionalized at API.
So I think that's a really nice point, thinking about the pool of students and the way that the pool of students also is developmental through time, right? So I take the point of starting younger. But the same questions come up there too, right? Which is, how do we get those students involved, and how do we get a diverse array of students at really young ages involved? So now it just shifts to a younger age group, but I take the point that it certainly starts young. Yolanda, we are almost out of time, so you get the final say.
One of the things I looked at differently as, you know, sending the information out, is I started looking at a lot more community colleges, because I noticed a lot of my students coming out of high school, sometimes they were intimidated by the, you know, 4-year university atmosphere. And so, if, you know, building on what Alex said, I have a lot of students who take dual enrollment classes, and they, you know, go to universities or go to, you know, community colleges. So I think that could be an avenue, you know, as well, looking at our 2-year and some that have a feeder pattern into the 4-year university, and that could, you know, be a building block for them as well. You know, they had it in high school, did a little bit in the 2-year, by the time they come to the 4-year college, they may be, you know, even more prepared. So the 2-year community college is also an avenue of hitting some ethics bowl recruits as well.
Also, really, I am out of space on my note page because you all have given such great ideas. One final thing I see in the comments from Sandy is pointing out that a lot of students who participate in Ethics Bowl are doing so as an extracurricular activity. And so that is an issue where largely only privileged students can do so in the first place. So a plug for putting it in the curriculum so that more students can take it. Sandy, I had not thought about that as a diversity issue, and you're right. So thank you for raising that point. I think I've got so many notes here now. We're thinking about ways that we might move forward for outreach and ways that we need to expand our conception of inclusion. So thank you all for this really helpful brainstorming session. So, all right, I know, John, we've got another session. Oh, wait, it's social hour. So I'm turning this back over to John.